our next guest, before I bring him out, I looked at all of the different industries of which disruption is just inevitable. And one of those that inspires me is education. The way we learn today is absurd, and to say the least. And at the same time, the expertise that people have and the expertise that people need to have, no matter where they are in the world, it's a gap that is only widening and can't be addressed by the most traditional of educational systems. So before we welcome our next guest, let's go to a video for Andela, please.
Keep your concentration.
I always wanted to do something with computers, but because I never had that exposure due to the limited resources that we had back home.
Nigeria is the largest country in Africa with 177 million people. It's larger than Russia.
If you believe that brilliance is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not, then you have to conclude that there are places where there are staggering numbers of extraordinarily bright people who just don't have a path in the formal economy.
We found 58 people in that pool that were in the top 2% of the entire workforce anywhere.
Everything I learned at first was from Windows command prompt, and that's really not a lot of stuff.
These young people traveled sometimes 2 hours one way to arrive at 7:30 a.m. for an unpaid 2-week boot camp to learn intro coding and programming skills.
They just wanted to throw themselves at something that would allow them to change their lives.
The most recent job that we worked on was one of a kind that was American and was living in the Bahamas. He was pretty much trying to replicate Craigslist because they didn't have that in the Bahamas.
Apple announces Swift. We can turn around, shift our training to say, for the next 3 weeks, you're going to focus on nothing but this, and then we go to the global marketplace and say, we now have 50 Swift developers. They're ready right now.
There just aren't enough talented developers.
They don't have to leave home. They don't have to go into debt to do it.
This is an extraordinary opportunity for you as a company to tap into this network of brilliant young people around the world.
Wow, now I can make websites for both mobile and desktop. Like, how cool is that, right?
From the time I joined Andela to now, I've realized that I've made more of an impact than I've ever made in my life.
We are currently oversubscribed. I wish that we had 100 fellows ready right now.
There's 100 people on our system simultaneously, all starting to flood into this one job application. Everybody was wondering what's going on from Nigeria.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome co-founder and CEO of Andela, Jeremy Johnson. Good morning. Well, Jeremy,
Hey, Brian.
thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That one guy, I tell you, he's my new hero. What's his name?
Wale.
Wow, yeah, Wale. I love him.
Amazing human being.
Clearly, and I got to say the same thing about you. Why don't you maybe walk us through what Andela is?
I'd be happy to. So Andela is a global talent accelerator. And so what we do is vertically integrate academia and industry. And so focused on the world's most in-demand skills, which, no surprise, turns out to primarily be software development. Andela trains extraordinarily bright young people, 95th plus percentile IQ in problem solving, to be world-class developers.
So why Africa?
Handful of different reasons. If you look around the world, most even emerging economies have systems that are looking to find extraordinarily bright young people and route them into different paths. You think of it in India, you're routing it towards the IITs. Around the continent, there's, Africa's 1/3 of all young people on the planet, or will within the next 5 years, and those systems don't exist in many different countries. And so you have massive pools of extraordinarily bright people. You realize human brilliance is roughly evenly distributed across the population. It's just true.
Right.
And so when you look at a country like Nigeria with 170 million people and 55% youth unemployment and 90% underemployment, you realize, well, there, by definition, must be a huge number of extraordinarily bright people without a path into the formal economy. Andela creates that path and manages to fund it. Instead of charging tuition, we actually are able to pay students to do it because the skills are so inherently valuable. And so you're creating an environment that actually builds extraordinary developers.
All right, so before I go on to the next question, that's such an important point because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the stats, but in the United States especially, a lot of young adults go into the workforce with a tremendous amount of debt from having gone to university. And they look at whatever job that they get as a way of sort of living life, being happy, and paying off that debt. And you just said that your students make money while they learn. So what is that business model? Help me understand that.
Well, it's very simple. I can produce a 95th plus percentile IQ and problem-solving software developer who has over 1,000 hours of training. So twice as much as someone coming out of the developer boot camps of the world who will work, either much simpler in Europe, but Eastern Standard Time hours for North American companies, and cost half of what it would take to bring someone in full-time into your company. And so we're able to partner with top-tier technology companies around the world looking for talent because there's a reason that Amazon has 16,000 open IT jobs, that Accenture has 14,000. The reality is the skills gap isn't just large, it's massive and growing. And this is a way to bridge that gap.
I want to talk about the skills gap. I don't think there's enough of a sense of urgency around this. I remember Jeff Weiner, CEO of LinkedIn, last year, I think, talked about this idea of the economic graph. And he said, there are companies that are posting job opportunities on LinkedIn, and then if you compare those opportunities to the profiles that people sort of say that their expertise is, he noticed that gap was quite scaringly so growing. Why is it that people haven't yet caught on to the fact that this is an issue? And at the same time, it's not just about young adults anymore, is it? It's just whether or not we all have to become students again.
So that's exactly right, Brian. And so what we're seeing is a fundamental sort of sort of focusing of what education means to our society. And that doesn't mean that traditional degrees are going away. Universities, 61 of the 75 human institutions that have been around for over 500 years are universities. They're going to be around for a while. That being said, when you look at the skills that are most in demand, they're actually mostly in technology and mostly shifting faster than universities are structured to be able to support those skills. They're also things that are more focused on actually being able to produce real things as opposed to the theory of how you engage with other people. And so when it comes to something like software development, you really need to interact with industry. You need to engage more like an apprenticeship than a 4-year degree in order to become world-class. People coming out of even the top technical schools around the world started a company like Google and are pretty far behind because they don't teach the things you need to be an extraordinary developer in academia because there's an 18-month technology cycle. It's shifting far too quickly. You need to directly connect into industry.
Right. So having worked with a lot of startups over the years, I could tell you that I've worked with developers all around the world and in the usual places. But what do you think it is? I mean, just honestly, what do you think it is about Africa that has made it almost invisible to the tech community?
It's funny. It is largely invisible to the tech community in the U.S., although as a continent, China has been investing in Africa heavily for 15, 20 years. And so in some ways, it's our fault not realizing that 7 of the 10 fastest growing countries in the world by GDP are on the African continent. There's actually a huge amount of not just progress, but extraordinary growth taking place. And the Western world largely ignores that and just doesn't realize the size and scope of it.
So I'm going to call out for questions in just a minute. I have another question that I want to ask you in the meantime, so get your questions ready. So disruption as an ecosystem. You're showing that there can be an alternative model for education and for closing that skills gap. How do you see this type of approach? How do you see your influence changing how we learn around the world?
I see us as a society moving more towards what is the most efficient way to not just employ young people, which is critically important, but also to create careers that are extraordinarily effective and sort of inspirational, that other people can then look to and say, I want to be part of that club. I want to be involved with that. And so when I think of what Andela will be, 5, 10 years from now, we're going to train 100,000 extraordinarily bright young people around the African continent, and in the process, help alleviate many of the sort of technology scale challenges that are taking place around the world.
Fantastic. All right, so let's call out for questions. Who's first for Jeremy? Not all at once, please. Okay. Number 5.
Hi, I have 2 questions. So we always see on maps that Africa is not lit up when you're looking at internet connection. How do you get around this? And secondly, are people coming to you with other sorts of training rather than just software development that your company could proceed to do, or you're going to stay in just software development?
So how many people in the audience here have read the book Neuromancer by William Gibson? There we go. That would make sense to an audience here. I say that because there's an amazing quote, "The future is here, it's just not widely distributed." And that defines infrastructure on the continent. And by that, I mean, I have a fiber optic cable coming directly into my campus. I have a faster internet connection in Lagos, Nigeria, than I do in Manhattan. That being said, if I move 100 yards away from that main cable, it becomes more complicated. And so by being able to be thoughtful about the infrastructure, you're able to get around that very simply, but you have to think about it in ways that you wouldn't have to when operating in the US or Europe, for instance. Second question, in terms of the skill set, the model could work in a variety of different sort of forms and formats, but it turns out if you're talking about extraordinarily bright people and the most valuable skill possible, if you were taking a data-driven approach to it, you'd see that 8 of the top 10 skills are going to be software development. And so I don't imagine that changing anytime soon for us, because it's what will allow us to scale the most effectively. The average Ruby developer in North America on Elance is making $45 an hour. Remote developers entirely.
All right, next question. Okay, number 6.
Jeremy, congratulations on the success of Andela. It looks like you've clearly built a very successful model in Nigeria. What are the other countries that you're looking at to expand?
So over the next 2 quarters, really, we'll be selecting the next country. We're in talks with a handful of different African countries right now, but you can imagine there are a number that are extraordinarily attractive. Some of the things we look at is population density. We're looking at total youth unemployment, looking at existing secondary education as well as internet penetration. But Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, there are a number of places where the model would obviously work extraordinarily well. And for us, what we think about is, one, how do we continue solidifying the model, but also how do we build that ecosystem that enables us to continue funding very high-quality education through the work that students are doing.
Next question, number 5.
Yeah, hi, very inspirational. What is the deal for the individual student? For how long, for how many years are they committing to you when you pay for their tuition?
So we pay students immediately from the beginning, and it takes them, imagine, 4 to 6 months, depending on the student, to be ready to engage full-time as a remote developer with a company around the world. That being said, about 1/3 of their time is always reserved for additional technical as well as soft skill development. And so we're supporting that for a longer period of time because we want students to graduate from this program as part of a network of the brightest, most sort of driven and technically savvy young people on, again, a continent that is 7 of the 10 fastest-growing economies in the world. That's a good club to belong to. And so when we think about sort of those students in the overall time period, it's a 4-year program, but it's also competency-based learning. Some will go through it faster, some will take a little bit longer, but overall, we expect it to be about 4 years.
If I may continue, after these 4 years, they are free to go and start their own companies, for instance.
I expect them to. I hope that they will, because that will take and drive the next generation of extraordinarily bright young people to say, I want to be an Andela Fellow.
I like that, actually. I like that. Okay, number 6, last question.
Congratulations, Jeremy, on this great venture. My question is, do you consider yourself as a social enterprise? And if so, how did you go with funding?
So our entire team is mission-driven, absolutely. That being said, I shy away from the notion of social enterprise or impact sourcing only because for us to have a transformative effect, we need to not just have an impact, which we care deeply about, but we also need to, dollar for dollar, be the single best way to spend money in engineering and in scaling out talent. And thus far, 100% of our clients that have partnered with us are still with us. And 100% of our students who have started with the program are still with us as well. Now, those will probably change a bit, but I'm happy with it as a start. But to be truly transformative, we need to continue to focus entirely on the quality of the production, the attention to detail, and software craftsmanship, as opposed to just producing low quality work, which most of, I think, that industry is focused on.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and attention. Jeremy,
Ryan,
thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all.